Hello all, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for tuning in. I've got the week 6 picks lined up for this video. It's been a couple of weeks since I've released one of these types of videos. I had a bout, unfortunately, with COVID, and I'm still dealing with some of the aftermath of that, including trying to scramble and get caught up to work that I got backed up on because I was out sick for about a week. So I am back in action though, and I have the week 6 picks ready to go. If we want to review my record so far this season, though, we have to go all the way back to week 3 to do it, since no picks were given for weeks 4 and 5. In week 3, I was 21-2 on the week, which is pretty exciting, bringing my overall record so far this season to a whopping 58-9. I was 2-0 in the top 25 picks that week, bringing me to 7-1 in those picks, and there were no top 10 picks on the day in week 3, so I remain 1-0 in top 10 picks. This week, we are halfway through the college football season already, and I cannot believe it is going by this fast. December is going to be here before you know it, and then it's going to be bowl season, and then it's going to be January, and it's going to be national championship game, and then it's going to be over, and it's going to be sad times because there's going to be no football anymore. But let's enjoy the college football season while we still have it. There are 3 top 25 matchups on the list for this week, along with a couple of other interesting matchups. So without further ado, let's jump right into this, shall we? The new number 1 team in the nation, the Alabama Crimson Tide. They are home against Texas A&M this week. I don't think the actual game is going to be all that intriguing. But what is intriguing about this matchup are the other storylines surrounding it. Beginning with the injury to Alabama starting quarterback and Heisman Trophy winner Bryce Young. In the game against Arkansas last week, he injured his throwing shoulder and did not play the second half of that game. The latest news I was able to find is that he is a game time decision. So he could play against Texas A&M, or Jalen Milroe, his backup, could play, as he did in the second half last week against Arkansas, and helped spearhead a rushing attack that absolutely tore through Arkansas in the second half. 2 70-plus yard touchdown runs the Arkansas defense let up, one of which to Milroe. So we'll see what happens with that. If Nick Saban feels confident enough in their ability to beat Texas A&M that he can start Jalen Milroe, or if he feels like they need some Bryce Young to be able to get them over the hump on that one. There's also the offseason controversy between the respective head coaches, Nick Saban on the Alabama side and Jimbo Fisher on the Texas A&M side. The controversy dealt with I believe, a player, a very good, high-rated player that initially committed to Alabama, but then Jimbo Fisher got in his ear, and then he decommitted and then moved over to Texas A&M. And Nick Saban had words about that, and then Jimbo Fisher had his own words for Nick Saban's words. And all the talk during the college football offseason was looking forward to this particular matchup. But part of the reason people were looking forward to this matchup is because they thought Texas A&M was going to be a lot better than they've been this season. They lost at home to Appy State a couple of weeks ago, and then they got annihilated by Mississippi State last week on the road. They are not as good as advertised, at least not yet. They have a lot of young players on their team who will learn how to play the game, but all that recruiting that they did this year is going to pay off next year for them. Probably not this year. Also, this is a revenge game for Alabama. They went on the road to College Station last year and got beat by Texas A&M with a field goal at the end of the game, handing Alabama their only regular season loss, and the only loss they would suffer until the national championship game against Georgia. So the fact that this is a revenge game for Alabama, it's at Alabama, it's a night game, it's an 8 p.m. start time, the fans are going to be going crazy. The fact that there is this tension between the two coaches, and the fact that Texas A&M isn't all that good this year, leads me to side with Alabama in this one, so go with the Crimson Tide. The number 2 team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs, coming off a win that they eked out in Missouri last week. After trailing in that game until the last 4 minutes of the game, they returned to the friendly confines of Athens, Georgia, to take on an Auburn team that is not that good, getting spanked by Penn State at home a couple of weeks ago. Go with Georgia to get back on track this week against Auburn. Number 3, the Ohio State Buckeyes are traveling to East Lansing to take on my Michigan State Spartans. Do I really have to do this? I mean, do I really even need to say anything about this game? Michigan State's defense sucks. Even without starting wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's still dealing with a hamstring injury, Marvin Harrison Jr. has stepped into his role pretty phenomenally for Ohio State. It's going to be an embarrassment. I'm not even going to watch the game. Ohio State's going to win. Number 4, the Michigan Wolverines. They are on the road at Indiana. Michigan has had a little bit of a problem with their first couple of Big Ten opponents, winning against Maryland by only a touchdown, letting up more points to Iowa than I think they've scored in their other games all season long combined. Next week, Michigan has a titanic matchup at home against Penn State, who's coming to the big house. Penn State right now is ranked number 10, and they have a bye week this week. So they've got 2 weeks to prepare for what Michigan has to offer. There might be a little bit of looking ahead on the part of Michigan, thinking that they're just going to roll into Bloomington and just roll over Indiana. Indiana lost to Nebraska last week, which isn't good for them. I think this game is going to be maybe a little bit closer than some people think because of what Michigan's done in the last 2 games against Big Ten opponents. Indiana is not going to beat Michigan, but don't be surprised if they hang in there for a decent percentage of the game before Michigan just starts to lean into them a little bit more and they win the game, getting over maybe some of their forward thinking into that game against Penn State next week. But go with Michigan for that matchup. Number 5, the Clemson Tigers, coming off their win against NC State last week. They are on the road at Boston College. Boston College is not very good this season. Clemson has a very good defense. Go with Clemson on that one. Number 6, the USC Trojans. They are home this week against a Washington State team that should not be overlooked. Although, once again, USC has a huge matchup on the road next week against Utah. So don't be surprised if Caleb Williams and company are maybe thinking ahead a little bit and watch Washington State hang in the game against them for longer than some USC fans are going to be comfortable with. Also, USC's defense has been nothing to write home about this year. They ended up letting up a lot of points to Stanford in the second half of that game a few weeks back. They let up some points in the first half against Arizona State last week. Their offense is humming, and their offense is going to score points. The problem is, there might be a time this season where that offense sputters and doesn't easily score points. And they're going to need that defense to hold them in the game. And I'm not sure if that defense is ready to do that yet. So I am going to go with USC for this matchup. But just like with the Michigan analysis, don't be surprised if Washington State holds on for a little bit before USC gets its act together and pulls away. Number 7, the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They are home versus Texas Tech. Okie State is coming off a big win on the road last week against Big 12 opponent Baylor. They return to the friendly confines of Stillwater to take on a Texas Tech team that is nice, but I would not say is necessarily good. I don't think that this is going to be a letdown game for Oklahoma State. They might be a little tired and a little distracted at the beginning of this game, but I think they get their act together relatively quickly and go with Oklahoma State in this matchup against the Red Raiders. In the first of our top 25 matchups on this week, we've got the number 8 Tennessee Volunteers on the road at number 25, the LSU Tigers. Tennessee comes into this game 4-0, LSU 4-1, with the only loss being that freak blocked kick against Florida State in the opening week of the season. When you look at the stats on this, there's only a couple of things that stand out. Nothing really in the stats made me go, whoa, holy cow. But there are a couple of things of note. First, Tennessee is throwing the ball all over the field to the tune of 365 yards a game. LSU, not so much. They're a little bit more balanced, rushing for just under 200 and throwing for just under 250. Tennessee is also rushing for just under 200. Tennessee, though, is allowing 309 passing yards a game, which is 60 more than LSU averages per game. That might be an opportunity for LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels to shine a bit in this game, going up against what is apparently a pretty weak passing defense that Tennessee is bringing to the table. When it comes to turnovers, though, Tennessee is playing a little bit tighter defense. They have fewer interceptions than LSU does, and they have almost the same amount of turnovers in their favor as LSU does. LSU has more fumble recoveries, but they have the same number of interceptions. One of the stats, though, that I think is kind of sticking in my head, and I don't really know why, it just is, it's that LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels has been sacked 15 times in the 5 games that LSU has played. That's 3 sacks per game. That's a lot. That tells me one of a few things. Either A, his offensive line is not doing the job it needs to do. B, he's holding on to the ball too much because his receivers can't get separation from the defenders. C, he's missing opportunities to throw the ball to open receivers and holding on to it too much and getting sacked. Or D, some combination of A, B, and C. But whatever the case is, I don't like that because I think that means that he's under pressure quite a bit. That pressure could lead him to mistakes throwing the ball that Tennessee's defense could capitalize on. Tennessee's only letting their opponents rush for 98 yards a game, which means LSU is more than likely going to have to rely on Jaden Daniels in the passing game to try to win them this game, and getting sacked so much is a bit concerning. Also, this is Daniels' first year as LSU's quarterback. He's an experienced one, having a couple years under his belt from his time at Arizona State. Tennessee's quarterback, Hendon Hooker, who is completing 72% of his passes. He's got 8 touchdown passes, no interceptions, and 3 touchdown runs on the season. He's also experienced. This is his second year under Josh Heupel and his second year under Josh Heupel's offense. And it's Josh Heupel's second year as Tennessee's head coach, as opposed to Brian Kelly, who was in his first year at LSU. Brian Kelly has won everywhere he's been. He's got LSU trending in the right direction, but I just don't picture him getting the job done this season, and I don't picture LSU getting the job done at home in this game. Also, something else that I think is an important kind of intangible, a non-statistic factor, is that this game starts at noon. This is a noon start in Death Valley. This is not a night game. Night games in the Bayou just hit differently. There's a different feel, a different energy that road teams have to deal with. Tennessee is going to have to deal with a raucous, loud, intense crowd, but it's different at a noon start than it is at a 7:30 or 8 o'clock start. I think the time of the day matters for this game. I think the experience of Tennessee matters. I think the sacks against Jaden Daniels matter. I am going to go with the Tennessee Volunteers in this matchup, although I will not say this pick is being made with a high degree of confidence. I am a bit nervous about this pick, but I'm going to roll with the Volunteers to go to 5-0 and set up a massive matchup against Alabama next week. Number 9, Ole Miss, coming off their win against Kentucky last week. They are on the road against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt is not that good, so I'm going to go with Ole Miss to move to 6-0 on the season. Number 10, the Penn State Nittany Lions. As I mentioned a moment ago, they have a bye week this week, so no call for them. The second of our top 25 matchups involves the number 11 team in the nation, the 4-1 Utah Utes, going on the road California to take on the number 18 ranked 5-0 UCLA Bruins. Just like with the Tennessee LSU matchup, the stats here, nothing really stands out. Both teams are very balanced. Both teams pass for a little over 200 a game, rush for a little over 200 a game. Utah's defense is doing very well, holding opponents to less than 150 a game rushing and just over 150 a game passing. UCLA's defense is very good, holding their opponents to less than 100 rushing and just 237 passing. They're both good on third down, with UCLA being a little bit better. They have roughly the same ratio in terms of turnovers lost versus turnovers gained. UCLA's secondary has 6 picks on the season, while Utah's got 9 picks on the season in just their first 5 games, which is pretty good. They've both beaten a couple of lackluster teams. UCLA has the better win, beating undefeated Washington at home last week. So the stats really don't lead me anywhere here. The one thing that does stand out that I think I'm kind of basing a lot of my pick on is UCLA quarterback Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's in his 5,000th year playing for UCLA. He's a 5-year starter. This is his 5th year starting for the team. He's completing 74% of his passes, which is very good. He's got 11 touchdowns to just 1 interception on the year. Both teams have big matchups next week. UCLA is on the road at number 12, Oregon. Utah, meanwhile, they are home next week against number 6, USC. I don't think either of those teams are going to be looking ahead to next week's matchups. I think they're going to focus on the matchup they've got in front of them, because it is a top 20 matchup we've got here in the Pac-12. This game is at UCLA. UCLA is moving to the Big Ten soon. And earlier this season, some folks in Big Ten country were mocking UCLA because in a game at home earlier against a lackluster opponent, the Rose Bowl where UCLA plays was over half empty. There were very few fans in the stands. And people were wondering, is this what we're welcoming into the Big Ten, this fan base? Well, part of it is that the stadium is 26 miles away from the campus. So students can't easily get there, for one. It's not like a Big Ten campus stadium, which is right on campus grounds. 2, it was against a team that they did beat and were predicted to easily beat, that nobody had any interest in seeing. This game is against a Pac-12 opponent, a top 11 ranked team. Their home team is 5-0, with a chance to go to 6-0 and keep pace with USC, setting up a potentially huge matchup between those schools later on down the road in a crosstown rivalry game. Not just a conference rivalry, but a city rivalry. They both play in Los Angeles. I think the UCLA Bruin faithful will show up in force. I think they are going to be loud. I think the stadium is going to be electric. And I think DTR's experience starting for UCLA is going to keep him and the offense calm. I am going to go with UCLA for the upset in this one, although once again, not with a high degree of confidence. But I'm going to go with UCLA in this one. Go with the Bruins at number 18 for the upset. Number 12, the Oregon Ducks. They're 4-1 on the season. They're on the road at Arizona. Arizona is not that good this year. Go with Bo Nix and the Oregon Ducks in that matchup. Number 13, the Kentucky Wildcats, coming off their close loss last week. A disappointing loss for them, where they made a number of mistakes, where they shot themselves in the foot against Ole Miss. They will get back on track, returning to the friendly confines of Lexington, Kentucky, when they take on South Carolina, who's not that good this year. Go with the Kentucky Wildcats to get back on track in that matchup. Number 14, the Kansas State Wolfpack, coming off their loss against Clemson on the road last week. They are home versus Florida State, who is also coming off their own home loss last week against Wake Forest. Florida State is on the road. I think, although I don't think the bubble for Florida State is entirely ready to burst, I don't think Florida State's going to be as motivated to get back in the winning ways as NC State is going to be. I think NC State is angry. I think NC State is mad. They had a chance They didn't really look like they were in control of that game right from the opening kickoff, but they had a chance to, for 2 years in a row, take down what has been the powerhouse of the ACC for years now, and they just didn't capitalize on that opportunity. I think they're going to take out that frustration on Florida State, go with North Carolina State to win that game at home against the Seminoles. Number 15, the aforementioned Wake Forest Demon Deacons, coming off that big road win against Florida State. They are home versus Army. Army, as a military academy, and therefore with weight limits on how big their men can be on their team, can't recruit giant dudes like other non-military academies can. Therefore, they have smaller guys, and they play a very odd type of old-fashioned system called the triple option that only a handful of schools run across the nation, which means for a school like Wake Forest, they rarely ever see that type of offensive scheme, which makes it sometimes hard for those teams to deal with it because they don't normally practice against it. Look for Army to try to play ball control, keep the clock running, and deny Sam Hartman and that high-powered Wake Forest offense the ability to score points. However, look for Sam Hartman and that high-powered Wake Forest offense to take the opportunities that they get from Army, and look for Wake Forest to win over Army at home tomorrow. Number 16, the BYU Cougars are on the road going to South Bend and touchdown Jesus and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. BYU comes in at 4-1 with their only loss, the beatdown they suffered against Oregon on the road. Notre Dame, meanwhile, has won 2 straight games after dropping their first 2 to Ohio State and then Marshall at home the following week. BYU has also gotten one of its starting wide receivers back who was out earlier this season. They got him back last week, and he made a big difference against Utah State in their win against the Aggies and BYU's win against the Aggies. Notre Dame, I don't think, knows who they are yet. I think that's the biggest problem with them. They're average in the passing game. They're average in the running game. Their defense isn't bad, but it's nothing to write home about. It's not Clemson-esque. It's not Georgia-esque. I just don't think that under their new head coach that they really know what they want to be. I don't think they know if they want to be a run-heavy team, a pass-heavy team, or a defense-first team. And I think that search for their identity is going to take a little bit longer this season for them to figure out. I think BYU, with quarterback Jaron Hall, with a returning wide receiver, a good defense on their own, and playing a very tight brand of football where they don't turn the ball over compared to Notre Dame, who has turned the ball over quite a bit this season. I'm going to go with BYU on the road to take out the Fighting Irish. So go with the Cougars in that matchup. And in the final of the top 25 matchups we have on the docket is a fascinating one because it involves one of the teams that is tied for the lead in the Big 12 Conference. And it's not the Oklahoma Sooners. It's not the Texas Longhorns. And it's not the Oklahoma State Cowboys, because we talked about them already. It's the football powerhouse that is the Kansas frickin' Jayhawks, coming into this game at 5-0 on the season, ranked number 19, welcoming in the number 17 ranked TCU Horned Frogs, coming in with an undefeated record themselves at 4-0. Again, just like we saw in the other 2 games in the top 25 that I analyzed, the stats aren't really telling me anything. TCU passes the ball a little bit more than Kansas does. They run the ball a tad bit more than Kansas does, but not significantly more. Kansas's rush defense is a little bit better. Their pass defense is about the same as TCU's. Kansas is completing 60% of the third down conversions, which is very good, but TCU's converting 50% of theirs. The quarterbacks are roughly equivalent. TCU's Max Duggan has 11 pass touchdowns and 2 rushing touchdowns. Meanwhile, Kansas's quarterback Jalen Daniels, who's setting the college football world on fire, has 11 passing touchdowns of his own and 5 rushing touchdowns. Kansas has beaten some nice teams. They beat West Virginia on the road. They beat an undefeated Duke team at home 2 weeks ago. They beat Iowa State at home last week. TCU, meanwhile, is coming off an absolute beatdown at home against Oklahoma last week. So everything between these matchups say that this is a very even matchup and should be on paper, and I hope in reality, is a really good game to watch. So since the stats aren't really telling me anything, I'm going to go with my gut feeling on this one. And even then, my gut is just turning over and over trying to decide what I'm going to do with this one. I'm going to lean towards Kansas to move to 6-0 on the season and set up a big matchup on the road next week against Oklahoma. I think this is going to be a bit of a letdown game for TCU. They had a ton of energy, a ton of drive last week at home in that win against the Sooners. I don't think they'll be able to match the energy that Kansas is going to be feeling this week when they host a ranked, undefeated team, a conference opponent, at their home stadium. Plus, ESPN's pregame show that goes on the road and travels to different stadiums week in and week out. They are in Lawrence, Kansas for the first time ever. The crowd is going to be going out of their minds. They've sold out 2 straight games for Kansas football. And there's no doubt in my mind that if this game against TCU isn't already sold out, that it will be by kickoff. So that'll be 3 consecutive sellouts for the Kansas Jayhawks. Who would have thunk? I'm a little worried, though, that the energy and the momentousness of this game is going to be too much for them. Kansas is not used to playing these huge types of games. It's been 15, 16, 18 years since Kansas had a good, high-ranked football team. They are just not used to this, and I'm a little worried that the pressure is going to get to them. TCU, though, isn't necessarily all that used to this either. I'm going to lean on Kansas because I think the home crowd will see them through. I think Jalen Daniels is going to have a coming-out game. I wouldn't be surprised if this game is a nationally televised one. It's on at noon. I think Jalen Daniels will show the world that he is a legit quarterback, that he is a top talent in the college football world. I think this game is going to be hard fought. I think it's going to be back and forth. I think it's going to be close. But again, with not a high degree of confidence, I'm going to go with the Kansas Jayhawks to stay undefeated. Number 18, the UCLA Bruins. I've already said that they are going to defeat the number 11 Utah Utes in the Rose Bowl tomorrow. Number 19, Kansas. As I just said, they're going to beat TCU at home and move to 6-0. That brings us to the number 20 team in the nation, the Kansas State Wildcats. They and quarterback Adrian Martinez, who is a run-first, it seems, quarterback, have a strong running game. They've got a good defense. They're on the road against Iowa State. I think this is going to be another tough, hard-hitting Big 12 matchup, but I'm going to go with Martinez and the Kansas State Wildcats to try to keep pace with in-state rival Kansas and move to 5-1 on the year. Oh man, if those two teams keep this up, that is going to be a fun matchup to watch later on this season when Kansas and Kansas State go head-to-head. My goodness. Number 21, the Washington Huskies, coming off the loss on the road at UCLA. They are on the road once again this week at Arizona. I remember a time a few years ago when Washington was winning the Pac-12 North and Washington State was competing and winning the Pac-12 North. And it seems like they would always go to the Arizona schools and lose a game that they had no business losing. Do I think this is going to happen again this time? I do not. I don't think Arizona State is that good. I think Michael Penix Jr., Washington's quarterback, is going to get the offense back rolling again. I think Washington gets back to its winning ways. Go with the Huskies over Arizona State in that particular matchup. Number 22, the Syracuse Orange, also 5-0 on the season. What is happening with this season of college football? They have a bye week this week, setting up another big matchup in the ACC as they welcome NC State to the Carrier Dome next week. Number 23, Mississippi State, coming off their big win against Texas A&M last week. They are home versus Arkansas, who has lost 2 straight games after starting the season 3-0. The biggest thing here is the status of Arkansas's starting quarterback, KJ Jefferson, who suffered a head injury and is going through concussion protocol this week. Arkansas head coach Sam Pittman said that Jefferson will travel with the team, and whether or not he starts will be a game-time decision. That's huge, because if Jefferson starts, Arkansas is a more potent team than if one of their backup quarterbacks is starting in this game. The other big thing about this game is that Arkansas is allowing their opponents 289 pass yards per game, and Mississippi State, with the Mike Leach air raid offense, is averaging 440 pass yards a game. I think the combination of the uncertainty about Jefferson and the passing attack that Mississippi State brings to the table leads me to conclude that Mississippi State is going to win that game. Go with the Bulldogs to move to 5-1 and set up some potentially big matchups in the SEC West later on down the line. Number 24, the Cincinnati Bearcats, climbing their way back into the top 25 after their loss at the beginning of the season on the road at the aforementioned Arkansas Razorbacks. They are home against South Florida. South Florida is not that good. Cincinnati comes in at 4-1 on the season. I think Cincinnati's a nice team. They're certainly not going to replicate what they did last year. They've already lost their ability to contend for the playoff. They can still, though, compete for the AAC championship, especially since Houston has just completely fallen off the map, it seems. I'm going to go with Cincinnati in this matchup against South Florida. I don't think South Florida is that good. Cincinnati's not as good as they were last year, but I think they're good enough to beat South Florida. So I'm going to roll with the Bearcats. And then lastly is number 25, LSU. As I've already said, I think with not a high degree of confidence that they're going to lose at home to the Tennessee Volunteers tomorrow. And that does it for this week's edition of the Picks. What do you think about this edition of the Picks? Do you like where I'm going with my choices? Are there games you disagree with me on? What games are you looking forward to watching this weekend? What games in the top 25 or games outside of the top 25 are you interested in watching, and why are you interested in those particular matchups? Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.